All right, diving in today, folks, and we are going deep, deep into the gut.
Into the gut.
Yeah, the gut microbiota. It's, well, everyone's talking about it these days, but
It's pretty hot right now.
it is. But we're going beyond the hype, really looking at how the GM, that's a gut microbiota for short, plays this, like, surprisingly huge role in some really big health issues. We're talking obesity,
Hmm.
metabolic syndrome,
Yeah.
type 2 diabetes, the whole shebang.
The big three.
Yeah. And our roadmap for this journey is this super in-depth review from the Journal of Clinical Endocrinology and Metabolism.
Great journal.
Oh, it's fantastic. And they've pulled together research all the way up to 2024, so we're talking cutting edge.
Fresh off the presses.
Seriously. So think of this deep dive as your express lane to really grasping how these trillions of microbes in your gut are pulling strings, influencing your health in ways we're just beginning to understand.
Absolutely. It's really a paradigm shift in how we think about health and disease. So, when we talk about the gut microbiota, what are we actually talking about? I mean, it sounds kind of, sci-fi.
Right.
But basically, it's just this massive community of microorganisms. We're talking bacteria, viruses, fungi, all hanging out in your digestive tract.
Living it up.
They're living it up. And here's the kicker. They outnumber your own cells, like 10 to 1.
10 to 1.
Crazy, right?
It is wild.
And the majority of these little guys, they set up camp in your colon. That's where the real action is, the most diverse population.
So it's like the big city of the gut.
Exactly. And what's really cool is this mix, this community, is shaped by so many things. Your genes, how old you are, what you eat, even the meds you're on, all play a part.
That's so interesting. When you think about it, it's like we're not just an individual, we're like a whole walking ecosystem.
That's exactly right. We're more microbial than human, if you think about it that way.
So when does this, like, inner world, when does it really get established?
Well, by the time you're about 3 years old, your GM is pretty much set in its adult form.
Really?
Yeah, pretty amazing.
So those first few years, those are crucial.
Absolutely foundational.
But even though it's established early on, it's not static, right? It keeps evolving. The review talked about how it shifts over our lifespan.
Right, so in both childhood and in folks over 70, you see some pretty significant changes. For example, there's a type of bacteria called actinobacteria. They tend to decrease as we get older,
Okay.
whereas others, like bacteroidetes and proteobacteria, they actually increase in older adults.
It's so dynamic, this whole thing.
Oh, it's incredibly dynamic. And if you look at kids, they often have less diversity in their gut microbiota compared to adults. And they've got more of a bacteria called bacteroids.
Hmm.
And then as we mature, we tend to have more Blautia.
Polio. Got it. Okay, so we've got this massive community of microbes, trillions of them, hanging out in our gut, shifting and changing throughout our lives. But it's not just a bunch of roommates. They're actually doing stuff. What's the point of all of this?
Oh, they're not just freeloading, that's for sure.
Good.
They're actually doing a lot of heavy lifting for us. I mean, think about it. They're helping you extract energy from the food you eat, especially those complex carbs that we have trouble breaking down ourselves.
Oh, interesting.
They're producing these really important signaling molecules. They're called short-chain fatty acids, or SCFAs. And these SCFAs, they act as kind of messengers in your body. They talk to your cells and influence a whole bunch of processes.
Like little chemical couriers.
Exactly. And on top of that, they play a huge role in regulating your immune system, keeping everything in check. And they even influence how your gut, your immune system, and inflammation all talk to each other.
It's incredible how interconnected everything is.
Right, there's this whole intricate network.
Now, those SCFAs you mentioned, the short-chain fatty acids, the review really emphasized how important they are. Can you tell us a little bit more about what they do?
Sure, so there are a few key players here, like butyrate. Butyrate's crucial for keeping your gut lining healthy and strong.
Okay, important.
And then you've got propionate and butyrate, both of them pitching in to help your body make glucose.
So they're involved in energy production.
Absolutely. And here's the really cool part. These SCFAs, they can actually trigger the release of these gut hormones like GLP-1, that's glucagon-like peptide 1, and PYY.
GLP-1, that sounds familiar.
Yeah, it's a big deal in diabetes research. And these hormones, they affect how full you feel after a meal and how your body handles insulin.
So they're really at the heart of, like, metabolic health.
Absolutely.
Now, I think this is where things get really interesting because we're talking about the gut microbiota, but we also know that what we eat has a massive impact on our health. So how does diet tie into all of this?
Well, it's kind of a two-way street, right? You are what you eat, but also your gut microbes are what you feed them.
Makes sense.
So if you're constantly loading up on high-energy, low-nutrient foods, think processed foods, sugary drinks, that kind of stuff, it throws your GM off balance. It leads to what we call dysbiosis.
Dysbiosis, that's the bad stuff.
Yeah, that's the imbalance. But the good news is that if you make changes, like losing weight, whether it's through diet, exercise, even surgery, you can actually help restore a healthier balance in your gut.
That's encouraging.
It is. Your gut's pretty resilient.
Now, I've always wondered about this. We all know those people who seem to gain weight just by, like, looking at a slice of pizza. Could their gut microbiota be playing a role in that?
That's a great question, and something researchers are actively investigating. What we're finding is that some bacteria are just more efficient at extracting calories from food.
So, like, some are better at squeezing every last calorie out.
Exactly. And there's been a lot of talk about the Firmicutes Bacteroidetes ratio.
The FB ratio? I've heard of that.
Yeah. But it turns out it might not be that simple. It seems like the specific types of bacteria present might be even more important than just that ratio.
So it's not just about the balance, it's about who's at the party.
Exactly. You want the right guests at your gut party.
So who are the VIPs, the good guys we want to see more of?
Well, when it comes to obesity, what we often see is a lower abundance of those beneficial bacteria that produce butyrate, like Akkermansia mucinifila.
Akkermansia, that's a mouthful.
It is a mouthful, but it's a good guy. It helps keep your gut lining healthy, like a strong barrier.
Okay.
And then there's Faecalibacterium prausnitzii,
Another good one.
another fantastic one.
Yeah.
It's a key player in reducing inflammation in your gut. And conversely, in folks struggling with obesity, you might see an increase in those opportunistic bacteria, the ones that can cause inflammation.
So it's like a battle going on in there.
Kind of, yeah.
Yeah.
And then there's Prevotella. Prevotella is a bit of a wild card, actually. Its role seems to depend on the context. On a high-fiber diet, it seems to be beneficial, even improving glucose metabolism.
That's good.
But on a high-fat diet, it's been linked to insulin resistance.
So it's like, depends on what you feed it.
It really does. It highlights how complex this all is.
Totally. And it's not just about what we eat, right? The review also pointed to how our modern lifestyles can throw a wrench in the works. Even things like messing with our sleep can have an impact.
Yeah, you're talking about circadian rhythms, our body's natural clock. When those get disrupted, like with shift work, it can actually negatively impact both our GM and our metabolism.
Really, just from messing with our sleep.
It's amazing how interconnected everything is. And those disruptions can actually increase the risk of obesity and insulin resistance.
Wow. So we've got diet, lifestyle, all influencing our gut microbiota, but how does this all connect to those specific health issues we talked about at the beginning, obesity, metabolic syndrome, type 2 diabetes?
Well, one of the key mechanisms here is inflammation. When your GM is out of whack, it can lead to this chronic low-grade inflammation throughout your body. It's called meta-inflammation. And this constant simmering inflammation, it's a major contributor to obesity, metabolic syndrome, and type 2 diabetes.
So it's like the gut is ground zero for this inflammation that can spread throughout the body.
Exactly. And the review also talked about something called metabolic endotoxemia. Basically, when you eat a lot of high-fat foods, it can increase the number of certain bacteria in your gut, gram-negative bacteria. And these bacteria, they release a substance called LPS,
LPS, what's that?
lipopolysaccharide. It's basically a component of their cell wall.
Mm.
But when it gets into your bloodstream, it can trigger a big inflammatory response throughout your body.
So it's like a signal that sets off the alarm bells,
Exactly. And that's systemic inflammation. It can contribute to insulin resistance and weight gain.
making everything worse.
Exactly. And to make matters even more complex, there are these microbial byproducts or metabolites that are also linked to health problems.
Metabolites, what are those?
So these are basically substances produced by the bacteria in your gut as they go about their business, breaking down food and whatnot. And some of these metabolites, like TMAO and indoxyl sulfate, they've been linked to cardiovascular problems and even kidney issues.
So it's like the gut is this bustling factory, and sometimes the byproducts aren't so great for us.
That's a good way to put it.
Now, let's zoom in on type 2 diabetes specifically. What does the review tell us about the gut microbiota's role in that disease?
Well, one of the key findings is that in type 2 diabetes, there's often this pattern of dysbiosis that goes hand in hand with increased insulin resistance. You see fewer of those good butyrate-producing bacteria, the ones that help keep inflammation in check.
So less of the good guys.
Exactly. And at the same time, there's often an increase in bacteria that produce branched-chain amino acids. One example is Prevotella copri.
Prevotella copri, that was the one that was a bit of a wild card, right?
Exactly. It highlights how complex this all is. There's also often a decrease in those important bacteria that help maintain the gut barrier, like Akkermansia and
Your
Faecalibacterium.
detectors.
Yeah, the guardians of the gut. And then on the flip side, you might see an increase in bacteria that can actually damage the gut barrier, like E. coli.
So it's like a double whammy, less protection and more potential for damage.
Right. It's a recipe for trouble.
So knowing all of this, what can we actually do about it? Is there anything we can do to shift our gut microbiota in a healthier direction?
The good news is there are things we can do. The review talked about dietary interventions like the Mediterranean diet. It's rich in fruits, veggies, whole grains, healthy fats. And it's been shown to boost those beneficial SCFAs we talked about.
The good guys.
Exactly. And there's fiber. Good old fiber.
Everyone's talking about fiber.
For good reason. It's
Yeah.
fuel for those beneficial bacteria.
Gotta feed the good guys.
Absolutely. And then there's resistant starch.
Resistant starch, what's that?
It's a type of starch that, well, it resists digestion in the small intestine.
So it makes it down to the colon.
Exactly. And that means it becomes food for your gut bacteria. And it's been shown to help with weight management by changing the composition of the GM.
That's pretty cool. So it's like a prebiotic, a food for the good bacteria?
Precisely. Now, medications can also impact the gut microbiota. Antibiotics, for instance, especially early in life, can disrupt the balance.
Yeah, antibiotics, they're powerful stuff.
They are. But the long-term effects of those early disruptions are still being investigated. We don't have all the answers yet. But there are some medications, like GLP-1 agonists, those are often used for type 2 diabetes, that actually seem to have positive effects on the GM.
So some meds can be helpful.
They can. And then there are more direct approaches, like prebiotics. We talked about resistant starch, but there are other prebiotics as well.
Prebiotics, those are like food for the probiotics, right?
Exactly. They help those beneficial bacteria flourish.
Yeah.
And then there are probiotics, which are live beneficial bacteria that you can take as a supplement.
Like yogurt.
Exactly. And then there's symbiotics, which are a combination of prebiotics and probiotics.
Yeah.
The idea is to provide both the food and the bacteria.
So it's like a 1-2 punch.
Exactly. And then there's the more, shall we say, adventurous approach, fecal microbiota transplantation.
FMT.
Yeah, it's exactly what it sounds like. Transplanting fecal matter from a healthy donor to someone with gut dysbiosis.
That's wild.
It is. And it's shown some real promise in treating certain conditions, like C. difficile infection. But when it comes to obesity and metabolic syndrome, the results have been a bit more mixed.
So still early days for that one.
Definitely.
Yeah.
It seems like it might require a more personalized approach, perhaps combining FMT with other therapies.
So the takeaway here is that the gut microbiota, it's this incredibly complex and dynamic system, and it has a huge impact on our metabolic health. And while research is ongoing, we're starting to understand the key players and how we can nudge things in a healthier direction.
That's exactly right. It's about understanding the ecosystem and working with it, not against it.
I love that. Working with it, not against it.
Yeah.
So for our listeners out there, I think the big question is, what can they do today, right now, to start supporting their gut health?
Well, I think a great place to start is simply by paying attention to what you're eating. Focus on those whole, unprocessed foods, load up on fiber, and maybe even experiment with some fermented foods or prebiotic-rich foods.
It's all about those small, sustainable changes.
Exactly. It's not about being perfect. It's about making choices that support your gut health over time.
I love that. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with this thought. We've talked about how the gut microbiota impacts our metabolism, our weight, even our risk of chronic diseases. But what we're learning is that it goes even deeper than that. It can influence our mood, our sleep, even our brain health.
That's right. It's truly a frontier of scientific discovery.
It is. And I think it highlights how interconnected everything is. Our physical health, our mental health, our gut health, it's all part of this intricate web.
Absolutely. It's a holistic view of health.
Exactly. So as you go about your day, consider this. What small step can you take to nurture that incredible ecosystem within you? Because when your gut thrives, you thrive. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us.
It's been a pleasure.
And we'll see you next time on